don't know that we know them. This is what in psychoanalysis, of course, is called unconscious fantasies, unconscious prejudices, and so on and so on. And I think that this level is crucial. To refer to previous two examples from movies, in The Sound of Music, what we directly know is that it's a movie about anti-fascist resistance of modest, honest Austrians. What we don't know that we know is that it's also the opposite. That is the movie about fascists resisting the Jewish takeover. And the tragedy of today's American politics, I think, is that precisely they are not aware of these unknown knowns, which is why there was a deep truth in one of the statements of that unfortunate Iraqi Minister of Information. We were all laughing at him during the last Iraqi war because of his ridiculous statements denying the obvious. But at one point, I claim what he told was absolutely true. When, towards the end of the war, he was asked, is it true that Americans already control, American forces, part of the Baghdad airport? He said, not true, Americans don't control even themselves. Perfect truth. Why? Because they don't know what they know. And this, what you don't know that you know, controls you, but you don't control it. Okay, so now we come to the really real core of the real, much more fundamental than this still symbolic real, but which paradoxically is at the same time the most virtual real. It is what? Let us think about attractors in mathematics or in physics. For example, you have small pieces of iron and you throw them around a magnetic field. They are dispersed, following a certain shape, infinitely approaching this shape, but this shape, of course, is not existing itself. It's just something that you can abstract, isolate from the dispersion of the small pieces of iron. That's the idea of virtual real. It's a shape. This is the real of this field, but it doesn't exist in itself. It's just an abstract form which structures the disposition of actually existing elements around it. Now, what has this to do with psychoanalytic problematic or even more with political problematic? My idea is a lot. Let's think about the precise status of trauma in psychoanalysis. It is similar to this non-existing attractor. That is to say, more closely, Freud shifted his position, as we all know, with regard to trauma. He shifted his position in a way which is, strangely enough, parallel to the shift in Einstein's theory of relativity, the shift from special to general theory of relativity. This shift in theory of relativity concerns the reference to the curved space, curvature of space. As most of us, I hope, know, for Einstein, in the first approach, it was the presence of the density of matter, of stuff, which curved the space. Space was originally perceived as empty space, abstractly was symmetrical, non-curved, then the presence of stuff curves it. But then, in a second step, Einstein accomplished a wonderful reversal. He just turned the terms around. It was not the presence of matter, of stuff, which curves the space. It was, on the contrary, the curvature of the space which was primordial. And what we perceive as matter is just a kind of a reified, fetishist misperception of a purely formal curvature of the space. And I claim it's exactly like this in the psychoanalytic notion of trauma. In the first approach, Freud imagined trauma as some kind of dense, raw presence of some real which brutally intrudes into our symbolic space and curves it. Quite literally. Let's imagine that I have my well-balanced symbolic space, then something traumatic happens to me. I'm raped, I witness a terrifying event, I'm tortured, whatever. And because of the traumatic impact of this event, my symbolic space gets curved. Some things can no longer be symbolized. The function of those symbols has to be taken over with other symbols. There is a kind of imbalance. There is a gap in my symbolic space. This would be the first approach. But then Freud noticed some strange things. What things? Let's recall his best-known analysis of Wolfman. The traumatic scene there, of course, is the small child, Wolfman, witnessing the parental coitus a tergo. But let's look at it in a much more precise way. What effectively happens there? It's not that this was simply a trauma. As a small 1.5-year-old child, Wolfman did not find anything traumatic in this scene. He just perceived it and stored it. It was 3-4 years later when Wolfman started to develop his theories, infantile theories of sexuality, and because he was not able to account for sexuality, in other words, because the symbolic space of his sexual theories was curved, it is only at this point that he resuscitated the traumatic scene. So, I think in clear parallel to Einstein, we can see how here it's the other way around. The primordial fact is not some brutal intrusion of the real, of a traumatic real. The primordial fact, and also the primordial real, is a purely formal imbalance. The symbolic space is curved, it's cut across by an antagonism, imbalanced, and so on. And to account for this, you need a reference to some real, which is, of course, the real in the sense of the traumatic appearance. It's a lure here, a trap. So what does this notion of the virtual real as trauma as virtual, what does this notion mean for politics? Can this serve us in order to analyze political ideological phenomena? Of course. Let's just recall how anti-Semitism functions. In its fascist version, anti-Semitism, or rather the figure of the Jew, the Jewish plot, is precisely an external trauma which brutally intrudes, disturbing social balance, curving, as it were, the social space. Society was supposed to be harmonious, balanced, then Jews intervened, distorted its, as it were, natural order. But of course, here at least we should be Marxist and turn things around. It's not that there is disorder, antagonism, disintegration, class struggle because of the Jews. Class struggle, or more generally social antagonism, comes first. That is to say, social space is in itself already curved, imbalanced. And in order to imaginarily, in an imaginary way, account for it, we invent the figure of the Jew. That is to say, we project the cause of it into the figure of the Jew. Even at a more fundamental level of today's economic constellation, I think that this notion of real as virtual can help us to critically reject a category which is more and more popular with politically correct post-colonial authors, the notion of so-called alternate or alternative modernity. The idea is, to put it simply, the following one. Of course, there are inconsistencies, antagonisms, repressive potentials in the notion of modernity, which ultimately means, of course, capitalism as the force of modernity. But, so the story goes, these antagonistic, repressive elements are not part of the very concept of modernity, but are only limited to the Anglo-Saxon West European model of modernization. Why then should there not be other alternate modernities where you can have modernization but without these alienating effects which characterize Western European process of modernization, without socially disruptive processes, without alienation, without exploitation, without ecological catastrophes, and so on and so on. And then, of course, it's free for grab. Anybody can have his or their own modernity. You can say we can have then Latin American modernity as alternate modernity, we can have African modernity, we can have Asian modernity, whatever. So what is the problem with this approach, which is basically an approach of